looking at the local markets and what's going to be a big focus this week, CPI numbers set to be released, and given that we saw a 50 basis point interest rate cut a couple of weeks ago, many still say that we could see inflation remain sticky at these levels. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, we know that inflation is very sticky in South Africa, mainly because of sticky food prices, but secondly, because of the continued spending on imports for the infrastructure spend. So therefore, we think that going forward, the debate around inflation targeting will continue. However, we don't foresee any changes in the general markers around the target. We think the target will stick, and people will focus more on how do we grow this economy, because you know that critically now we need to save jobs, and that's going to be the focus, not the inflation, but how does South Africa create jobs, maintain living standard in the difficult period where South Africans find themselves in.
Well, you mentioned very key issues about creating jobs and obviously keeping the economy at a growing pace. Do you think we're going to see another interest rate cut going forward?
We should see another one, because we think that what we see, we're seeing very sluggish retail sales. The banks are under some stress and not lending as you would expect them to. But more importantly, that people are being laid off work. So critically, we need an injection. Government doesn't have money. It's running a deficit at the moment of about 7%, and going forward expected to worsen. Therefore, there's no one who's got money at the moment. The only instrument available is monetary policy. So we expect Jill, when she comes in, to lower maybe to about another 50 basis points, and gradually slowly. We think that probably the bottom will be around 9%, and if we get there, we hope by that time the economy will be recovering. However, we know that government and companies are struggling at the moment. Therefore, we expect that there could be a change in fiscal policy under Zuma's terms, because if the world economy doesn't recover as expected to recover, it means that South Africa won't have enough revenue. Therefore, revenue has to come elsewhere, and it may come from consumers, because consumers who are about over 100,000 consumers or households who are paying tax, and we see those being under stress going forward. The government doesn't get the money that it needs, and therefore reversing the gains and a manual of reducing taxes, and consumers being taxed again to show up the stage given the challenges that South Africa faces. So we're hopeful that the stimulus around monetary policy does get us going. Otherwise, the consumer may see himself being taxed more going forward to show up government revenues.
Is that the change that we're going to see in fiscal policy?
That's what I expect, because I don't see, unless really there's a miracle, that both the stimulus on the fiscal side, on infrastructure, and the monetary policy, pushing it low up to about 9% prime, that at that level maybe we may see some recovery. Otherwise, failing which we may see the reversal of all the tax gains and household being taxed more as it was under apartheid.
Country contracting by 3%. At this stage, at what level do we need to see growth so that we ensure that we don't lose jobs?
Well, we're losing jobs, Eleni. The reality is that as long as Europe, because our biggest trading partner is Europe, we saw German and France figures coming out positively. But is it sustainable? We don't think so. So we need to see some real consolidation. I know that the markets are predicting a better life given the rally that we've seen in the past few days. Therefore, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But for South Africa to really gain, we need to see Europe consolidating growth. More importantly, the rand also weakening somewhat so that our exporters can really penetrate those markets where we're competitive. Without that, our growth levels are going to continue shrinking, and we may see a lot more worse than what we've seen now.
Strikes still under the spotlight at this stage, and we've seen wage increases higher than inflation. Do you think these increases have been warranted, and what do you make of the new focus that's been on the striking season this year in particular, considering that many say that the unions were assisted Jacob Zuma in gaining power in South Africa?
Well, given the erosion of living standard for a lot of households with high food prices, high transport costs, one understands where the demand for high wage is coming from, because people's living standard are just being eroded. But more importantly is the fact that because unions lag in the past, they see what executives have been paying, and the executive made a killing 3 years ago before the crisis, and therefore they're saying let's catch up, let's narrow the wage gap. However, the timing is unfortunate, because it's a time where companies need to be really cutting down on costs and overheads, making sure that they can sustain themselves during this session. So there's a mistiming there between union demands and the realities. And somehow, somewhere, we expect that maybe unions may sit down with management to try and see how to cut costs and save jobs. Because, as Mr. Vavi has said, that the focus now is on saving jobs than anything else. And we hope that union leadership will buy into Mr. Vavi and really focus on how we save jobs and how we save companies so that we maintain the living standard of households.
What's interesting to note, there's a new union that's been formed by COPE. Do you have any thoughts on that? And what kind of power do you think this union will have?
Well, we've seen, with all these political parties, remember that Inkatha had something called AUSA. So there's been a lot of these new unions, but really they've been very, very, they didn't have teeth, a lot of them. So we see really two very strong unions, one affiliated to COSATU, the other one affiliated to Solidarity, as the main really voices of workers. But one really look forward to one union, but South Africa really, the working class faces the same challenges around keeping jobs, around maintaining the standard of workers. Therefore, we expect that at some point there might be a discussion around one union, one industry, and one federation, one country, where COSATU and Solidarity can speak one language and really fight for workers than fight for class and race.
Lumkile, just very quickly, let's look at the agricultural sector. We know a lot of farms are being bailed out at this stage, and we know that agriculture is very keen on diversifying our economic portfolio. What kind of money is going to be pumped into the sector?
Well, firstly, as we've discussed, that the state doesn't have a lot. So in terms of really huge cash injection to the land bank, we don't see that forthcoming. What is important is maybe really a strategy, because there's a lot of focus around DFIs, or development finance institution, by government. We need to see some consolidation there so that we can have a more focused development finance institution that can really offer a package where as SME doesn't have to go to 3 institutions but can go to 1. So we're really looking at how government cuts down and comes with a development finance institution policy where we can have fewer that are well targeted to save agriculture sector, because that's critical for us for rural development.